Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode.
Are we having a rebellious standoff about who's going to open the episode? Which one of us is going to be the people pleaser in cave? I feel like you might outlast me on this. I can see the resoluteness in your face where you are like, I am not good. And you wanted to talk then and you stopped yourself because the minute you do, like the baton passes to you. Yeah.
Did I win? That is precisely what my inner rebel feels like. It is a decision almost. It is like a, oh no, like I am gathering my force and my will to sit here in this place. I'm going to dig my heels in further. But you know what? Last night I was thinking about this episode, trying to think about actual specific stories. And I found myself falling short a little bit. I think my inner rebel has gotten so much quieter. It's just not quite as exciting anymore. It used to be such a theme for me that when I first started talking about an inner rebel, I found myself always talking about the inner rebel the way I do with certain topics and themes. That was one I would constantly bring up. And I find that I don't know that I have that feeling in me. I'm actually trying to think about when the last time my inner rebel has felt activated. And it's hard.
Yours feels different, I think, to how I experience mine. Like that resoluteness, my inner rebel is more chaotic. So maybe there's something like from a developmental perspective about where it comes in.
So interesting.
The episode that we did on food and festivities, you spoke about how if you were at a party and you didn't want to eat, you kind of didn't care what other people thought. It was just like, it was this resolute, I'm just not going to eat this food. And it was this. And I remember at the time thinking, mine was just so much more chaotic than that. I felt like my resolutions was never strong enough. And that was part of the frustration with myself. When I hear people who have restricted or controlled, there is sometimes that resolute part of themselves that can just go, no, for a period of time until the other parts come in. So it feels very different. My rebel feels like a rebel without a cause. It doesn't know what it's trying to achieve. It just knows something doesn't feel right and it's just playing out.
So how did your potty training go?
I have no idea.
I don't either. Just makes me wonder where that developmental stage might have gotten stuck, which it would be different for either of us, or if the ways in which we were treated were different. That's getting into the weeds.
Yeah. Well, I'm somebody who can perceive that someone or something is trying to control me even when it's not. So I feel like there's a sensitivity in myself to that. So I can feel controlled by my own expectations and I don't like it. It makes me think of Janine Roth's permitters and restrictors. Mm-hmm. And the permitters being those that don't restrict as much, so they tend to be much more permissive with their actual eating, or they appear to be. They're full of the guilt and shame, which means it's not really permission, right?
Right.
But I feel like with the permitters as opposed to the restrictors that are much more controlling, until they're not, they'll have bursts of losing control as well. And the anxiety and the tension and fear that comes with that is like a slightly different experience. And of course you can move between the two. But I feel like with the permitters, there's this, for me, my experience of being a permitter was that even my own expectations feel like confinement. And so I need to just keep proving that I'm free, even if through doing that, I'm causing myself more harm than good.
I do relate to that. I think maybe I've got a different inner rebel when it comes to external expectation versus internal, because what I was thinking about as I was trying to collect a story for myself, was I think I had this conscious, ego-driven self that was intent on doing things a certain way, and was quite unrelenting about that, had a lot of expectation about health and how I should be eating and and like the things that it was kind of like, come on, Steph, like this is the way we act. This is the way you do it. And the inner rebel was It wasn't resolute, though. That one wasn't this sense of I hear myself putting these expectations on myself and I'm rebelling against it. It was more this a sense that I didn't like this sense of pressure. It wasn't really about necessarily the rules themselves. It was just this sense I had of my own putting myself in a box and feeling like, bleh, like, no, just this maybe rebel without a cause a bit, sense of not doing that thing, or of moving out of that box. But I also didn't feel like I had a right to that. Like that felt like a very childlike part of me, or a part of me that didn't make any sense and that had a lot of irresponsibility and ugly will. Like this, it was shadowy. It wasn't, I had no pride in that part of me, whereas now I do. I think that part of me now is like, yes, you say no. You say you don't like the way that this feels. And I think that when it was the rebel, it was a sense of being or saying no that I couldn't consciously accept. It was like that was a bad thing. And therefore it was very demonized. But I now, and I've spoken about this before, of this sense of like that's an asset. It's a binge eater's asset when there is a sense of no to the control. Misguided, as I always say, but still, I think that inner rebel is such a power.
Well, binge eating, and I ask people whether they relate to the idea of binge eating as feeling rebellious. Mm-hmm. Most people almost invariably say, like, yes, they can relate to this idea of there's a rebelliousness to binge eating, and there's a frustration, and this probably ties in with self-sabotage and what we spoke about in the self-sabotage episode. I think it also really ties in with the people-pleasing part. So when you were describing how at parties, if you were determined that you weren't going to eat something, it didn't matter what anyone else said. Like the people pleaser was just hushed down in order for this to take over. So I guess I'm curious about the relationship between the rebel and the people pleaser.
I don't relate to people pleasing, which is weird. I don't know. I was a people pleaser in my, okay, I'm working this out as I talk. So yes, of course. I most definitely grew up as a people pleaser. Once binge eating came into my life, once that started to happen, the people pleasing side of me really changed. Partly in reference to the humility episode way back when, was because I simply couldn't please people when I was binge. Like it was I was doing everything in this opposite way, but not because I felt entitled to it. It was just that I couldn't help myself. Like there was just such an out of controlness that was going on that simply didn't allow for having it all together in a way that others would expect or want of me. I think the deconstruction of that people pleaser during that time was not a choice that I made. It wasn't something I did feeling safe about it, but it was a wonderful byproduct of not being able to control that inner rebel, and helped me actually, I feel so much more comfortable not people pleasing now, of saying no, of not being liked sometimes. I feel like that comes from that era because I was forced into it. I don't think I could see that side. So when I picture myself at those holiday meals, knowing that my aunt or my grandmother who had just made this thing wanted me to eat it and felt upset or frustrated or disappointed that I didn't, the sense of no in me, the sense of was like it was all encompassing. It was the way I would describe a flood almost. It was tunnel vision, and that was all that I saw. So this other place in me that would have wanted to please would have just not even been there. It would only maybe come later as a way of shame. But in that moment, it was so overtaken by the anger and the fire of the rebellious feeling.
So that was the rebel, though, saying no? Or does it feel like...
Yeah. Saying no to the food?
Yeah.
Yes. You're not going to make... No. You're not going to make me do it. Yeah. So there was... People-pleasing just didn't have any room.
Yeah. I mean, if I was just to make this as reductive as I can, I feel like, on the whole, the rebel wants his freedom.
Yeah.
So doesn't always go about it the right way, or the most helpful way, let's put it that way, but needing to feel free. So sometimes, even though I've had it before where I've committed to something and then wished I hadn't because I felt kind of confined, and the rebel in me, or I don't know if it's the rebel in me, but part of me wants to get out of it. And then I say to myself, okay, well, you can reschedule, you can back out of this commitment that you've made. And then sometimes, quite often, I think, oh, actually, no, actually, I do want to do it.
Yes.
But the minute I feel like I don't have a choice.
Yes.
Which is why it's so important. The most important thing for me to feel okay around food is to keep feeling like I have a choice. The minute I say to myself, oh, no, I should eat this way, or I need to do this, or I should do this, I should do that. And it's like I have to almost come at myself with like kid gloves and coaxing myself. And also trying to approach it from a place of kindness, which is why things like the intention that I shared before that I used to say to myself quite a lot is I can eat whatever I want. The only condition I'm putting on myself is that I really have to try and enjoy it and to notice it. And that for me, there was still so much choice and movement in that. That's not to say that that was some kind of magic intention that always worked, because I could rebel against the intention, but it was kind of the best one that I found. That would help me when I was feeling chaotic around food again and trying to regulate. The word regulation around food, like regulating my appetite, was really helpful rather than control or having this set idea of what it needed to look like. I need to feel regulated.
Yeah, it makes the mission more pure. Like it feels like a more sincere effort rather than a means of like, I think about the inner rebel as like your inner autonomy. You know, I think the word autonomy is much more generous and more accurate. I think inner rebel gets the rep of being a bad thing, or something we have to stifle or moderate. And I think that it's more about like, we need to feel a sense of our own autonomy. And when you even, I think the difficulty in this, in things like intuitive eating, and even you framing this, right, is that in the moment when it worked for you, it came from you. So this was your own sort of, this is what makes sense for me. This feel okay. Yes, if I have choice. Now you might listen to this podcast enough and hear like Sarah says, I need to have choice, and that's what. Okay, and that makes sense to me. And then you go in you're in your own kitchen. You're like, but Sarah said I should have to, and all of a sudden it's not coming from you. Yes. It's coming from another should, and that's what's so difficult. It's like a fish. Like you keep losing its grasp. It's got to come from you. It's got to make sense to you. And I think it's too much that we can find what someone else has said or a book we've read, or, you know, that tells us this technique that sounds very real and true, because it is. Like, I 100% agree with you. But if I keep framing it like Sarah's advice, it's going to feel like it doesn't matter how wonderful the advice is. It's the fact that it's not from me, and it doesn't feel like the choice. And that's what's so tricky about self-help.
Yeah, that makes me think of the stress episode when we were talking about, you're saying, I don't want to go for like, the advice about going for a walk if you're stressed, being frustrating advice. And I go, yeah, but I do feel better if I go for a walk when I'm stressed. And you're like, I do too, but I don't want somebody to tell me to go for a walk when I'm stressed. That's not helpful. And I've had that with people, a number of people telling me that, oh, I'm trying to do your thing where you sat up at the table and you only ate certain foods sitting at the table, because I did that for a couple of months. And I've shared how I did that. And then other people have taken that and gone like, okay, I need to do this for 2 months because that's what Sarah did and that worked. And I'm saying, well, why? Why are you doing that? I'm like, oh, well, actually, I'm hoping it's going to make me eat less. It's like, my motivations were a bit different at the time. My motivation, and it came from me. I hadn't read it anywhere. This wasn't after reading an article about mindful eating going, this is what I needed to do. This was something that came from me. I was like, this feels so problematic, this tie between television and eating. I was like, I was in this stage where I felt like I couldn't watch TV and not eat. Yeah. And I couldn't eat and not watch TV. And I could see this thing playing out. I was like, I need to separate this. But other people are hearing it and going, oh, mindful eating. I need to do all the mindful eating rules that I've heard. And then, of course, the rebels pushing back. They're going, I'm trying to do that and I'm struggling to do it. And they're blaming themselves because in theory, doesn't it sound so simple? Just sit at the table when you eat these foods. But the reality of actually doing that and the why and where it comes from.
Exactly.
Oh, you're so right.
You can't almost have a discussion about the inner rebel without talking about like your internal connection with yourself, right? There's got to be some self involved here if we're looking to deactivate the inner rebel, or to, you know, which I'm not even sure that we are. But if the inner rebel is presenting problems, to address that, it's about first getting in touch with you and knowing what you think, what you need, what you want, what you're trying to do. It is going to, anything we're doing and trying to work with the inner rebel isn't going to, I'm not going to say that entirely. Maybe some of the ideas we present here are going to be helpful as far as you can take them and interpret them in a way that makes sense for you, but not as point, like face value of like, that's what I should do. Okay, I'm going to go do that, which is going to be more of the people pleaser, right? So the people pleaser is going to be the one who likes to hear what they have to do and then go do it, right? Like that's the irony here, I suppose, is that it is the deconstruction of people pleasing that allows us to say, what do I need and want, or what is right for me, even if that goes against what I have heard outside or what others want from me or what looks okay, in order to really offer oneself the sense of autonomy we need for that inner rebel to like calm down.
Mm-hmm. It's making me think, you just, for me, I don't want the inner rebel to be the only one in the car. Like, all the others have got out and gone like, we're not going on this ride with you, off you go. Because that's what it felt like, just the rebel would take over. And without the other parts there to like look out for other interests in other parts of me, it just wasn't helpful. When I'm thinking about how, it feels like each of us have an inner rebel with a different flavor. They're not all going to be the same. When we're talking about freedom and autonomy, I guess the first place we really see that is the terrible twos, right? Toddlers.
Yes.
Having tantrums because they have their will and their autonomy. And yet it's the job of the adults around to socialize this child because we live in relationship with others and we live in society and cultures and everything. So and a lot of the kind of child development stuff would say that a big part of it is how those early stages are handled. How do those around you handle you when you are out of control emotionally, but you have your will? I think a lot of parents, I mean, you can speak to this as a parent. I can speak to this as someone who's very comfortable judging other people's parenting. Like, how do you handle that? Because you've obviously gone through that at least 3 times with 3 different kids.
Gosh, I still am. So I have to, admittedly, I had learned and read a little about conscious parenting. This was a big catchphrase when I was starting to raise children. So I have some awareness about this that I know would not have been there, and I would have raised my children this way I was raised if, I had the privilege of evolution, I suppose, and education on that. When I'm going to use my 5-year-old, who is the closest to that and absolutely still is very much in touch with her autonomous desire.
I've seen.
Oh my gosh. In fact, last night we had, to the point where I'm getting, okay. So there is a part of me that wants to shut that right down. Like take control her. Not only because it is, just more that kind of this idea of this is what you should do. A child shouldn't behave like this, but also for my own sense of regulation, which I suppose was going on in my own parents. When I look back and think of the way that my wilder emotions were met, it was with this sense of shut those down because we're not comfortable with them, right? They're dysregulating me as the parent, which is exactly what happens to me, and why it feels very like it's so much overload for me. But there's also this sense of like children shouldn't be allowed. You're supposed to control them. I think that's quite an older generation's philosophy of raising children. I think that's changing, but I'm stuck in this generation now of like, ooh, which I don't like I was raised in this one way and now they're telling me to do it this other way. So what I do now is to and I've done this so many times where I'll just allow her to throw a temper tantrum through her body. Like the way that she's expressing herself through her body has become something I now value and understand as like this is her nervous system's way of processing something and demonstrating her own, her emotions and what she's going through, but also that she needs choice, right? So the Dr. Becky Kennedys of the world are saying, like do you want to throw this temper tantrum in your room, or should we stay here? You know what I mean? Like, there's got to be some element of offering choice, which takes a very regulated parent to do, which is very difficult. And I think, but I think that this choice element is, why did this come up?
I'm thinking about how the inner rebel develops, right? How we have to assert our autonomy in a world that's trying to shut that down through socialization. Right. Some of it necessary, some of it a bit heavy-handed, perhaps.
So it is the truth. I find that my children calm down. Now, this is not a perfect science, but Elise will calm down when she feels that she's allowed, and when she just kind of gets it out. And when she doesn't feel like I'm controlling her. And there's times where that's a real struggle. But you can sort of, as a parent, watch this play out and understand yourself as you watch a child and be like, the second I offer them some free will and lack of shame, it works out of their system. It doesn't work out immediately, but it comes right down. My middle child is a really great example of that as well. She actually wants to do that on her own. She's a very natural course of like, let me go do what I need to do. Let me be allowed to do that. Let me not be told that's a bad thing. Let me go to my room and have a fit, and then I'll come out and I'll be okay. She does that very naturally and in a way that doesn't really bother me. So it's very easy to let her. But I'm not, it's very difficult even with your own sense of wanting to get mad about something or to want to do the opposite of what you're supposed to do, to feel like that's the right choice. It feels, because there's just out of controlness to it, it feels wrong. And it feels like you've got to rein this in. You've got to rein this in. Where will it go if you don't? And if we don't have the experience of knowing where the other side of that is, like of watching yourself be able to move through an emotion like that, or move through a choice and come to our own conclusions without something being put on us, we don't ever recognize that there's safety in that. And I think that's what the new generation of parenting is being taught to do. Whether or not that's happening, I can't say. But I think that's the premise behind conscious parenting now, is to allow those more natural impulses and those choices to have more of a resolution, rather than, I think in our generation, I think they were more, they got caught in a trigger loop. It probably still just exists.
If you want connection and support around any of the topics we talk about on the podcast, we would love for you to join our membership community.
Members have access to monthly online support groups, a private Facebook group, live episode recordings, and member-only Q&As.
If you would like to join us, please head to lifeafterdietspodcast.com/community.
Now let's get back to the episode.
So as you're talking, for me, the conflict that's coming up, it seems to be a conflict between control and freedom. Right? So thinking about myself, this last couple of years, I've been living in the same flat, and there's been a real sense of routine to my week, and a lot of things have been kind of steady and contained and kind of within my control to some degree. And then there's this yearning of freedom. It's like, actually, like, I don't want everything to be quite as like in line as this. I want the freedom. So then I give up my flat and, I come to the US, and I've got a few other plans over the next few months, but I am in theory homeless. But that freedom then comes at a cost of safety to some degree. Yeah. So there's the control that's this safety. So maybe actually it's more the conflict is between safety and freedom, that those two things, trying to have both, is not that it's not always possible, but I think many of us, I speak to this myself, find ourselves swinging between the two, whether it's with food, between control and binge, or whether it's even with, I'm feeling pretty safe and bored in my life. Let's just throw everything up in the air and see where it lands. And then there's a sense of, there's a lack of safety in that is becoming easier, but it's unsettling. I don't feel as grounded as I did when my life was much more predictable and routined, but yet there was something in me that wanted something different from that anyway. That part of me needed to do this.
So do you think it's a toggle? Do you think it's something that, when the pendulum swings too much on this side of safety, routine, stability, that we need to bring it over to something, to kind of go to the opposite side of things for a little while in order to is the point to toggle, or is the point to moderate, or is the, how do you even see how do you reconcile all of this, having now been on this side of the freedom? Where will you settle?
I think it's human to overcorrect.
Yeah.
Especially as an all or nothing thinker. So if we think about that with food, it's like you're in the binge, you've got freedom, you're eating whatever you want. So feels like this freedom, and it feels like freedom for a while, maybe even for a very short while, until it doesn't. And now the control and safety feels like freedom, and you get into the control and safety. This feels so freeing for a while until it doesn't, and that swing back and forth. So sometimes that swing is necessary, and I see this with people pleasing. When people are realizing, I keep saying yes and I want to say no, sometimes there's almost this overcorrection. I'm going to assert my boundaries, and it's like, no, I have to say no. I have to know I can say no.
Yes.
So I think the swing possibly is necessary. You can see that with restriction and non-restriction, but maybe the most helpful, ideal place is to somehow land somewhere in the middle where you're kind of like swaying it between the two, but the sway is smaller.
Yes, and I think that speaks to boundaries, and that's why that's going to fold into this, a conversation about rebellion and freedom and control and safety, and children and parenting, like that example, because we're all just big children, but there is this necessary extreme. I think so. I mean, I couldn't have recovered without that pendulum. That is part of an exploration of where do I feel safest on both sides of that pendulum. And in that experience, you have to experience those things, because it's within that experience that you are able to then say, here's where my safe boundaries are on both sides of that. They're not quite as far as over here as I went. I went all the way over here, and that was a little much for me. But they're also not all way over here, but I have figured it out. And that's what a child does, right? Is like the parent offers space to explore within safety. And that's where the child learns, I can go over here but I can't cross this line, and I can go over here, but I can't. And it all feels like the child's choice and will and exploration, even though it's quite set up by the parent. But I think that's what we're doing for ourselves when we're figuring something out. I don't think you can start without that sort of overcorrection, or I think that's part of exploring and experiencing and learning is exactly that journey.
Here was my frustration with myself, I think, like through the journey with food. I was so frustrated that how it felt to me, because of this part, I might have called it self-sabotage, I might have called it rebel at the time, I don't know that I really gave it a name. But it felt like I was just constantly making promises to myself and constantly breaking promises to myself. It was happening a lot around food, but it would also happen in other areas. I'd start projects, I'd come up with this idea, I might even just start a book and then just abandon. And I guess I wanted to bring that up because I wanted to speak to, I guess, the listeners, anyone listening who might feel like my rebellious part is stopping me from getting everything that I want. Like, it's just stopping me from moving forward. I can't get myself to do the things that I want to do. What would you say to that?
Well, this was part of the self-sabotage episode. Didn't we talk about this, right? So there's still a should implication, right? And I this is where parts work comes in for me, that like, I've reconciled parts, I think, to an extent where I would no longer blame myself for not following through, because in a situation like that, I would be convinced at this point, believe me, this didn't exist before, but that there is a reason, there is a part of me that is interrupting that. Like, there's a part of me either not getting seen, whose needs aren't getting met, or has something to say that is yet to be uncovered, that is speaking on behalf of that quote unquote self-sabotage. Mm-hmm. That inner rebel is not, I don't believe our inner rebel rebels for the sake of rebellion. It's kind of a means to something, whether that is a felt sense of autonomy or not. You know what I mean? That can simply be it. And sometimes naming this and recognizing it and validating it is what I have needed to. I'll give an example, and I'm going to bring it to a little bit to body image. 2 ways that I have felt the inner rebel with my body image have been, one, honestly, in accepting, in the grief process of accepting that my body size wasn't created to be a size 2 or 4 or 6, like that I carry more weight on my body than I thought I should. there was a sense in that of rebellion, like against who or what I couldn't name, the biology, I suppose. And that was frustrating because there was no one to blame. Like it was just this sense of, I just feel like I'm mad. I'm mad that this is my body type. But when I could name that and validate that itself has really helped to say, like, I just feel resentful at times that my body isn't tiny, that I'm not one of those people who has the privilege of being able to walk, to put anything on and it looks the way that I think it quote unquote should look, right? Like that naming this and validating the part of me that feels angry about that, even if it feels nonsensical, is huge. The other part is with clothing. I know that you aren't somebody who, you don't have like an inner fashion guru. And I only know that because you say it. Because you wore those jeans to my house the other day. I quite liked quite a lot. They had a stripe down the side. I really like them. Anyway. Well, when I perceive that I'm supposed to dress a certain way, like fashion trends, especially fashion trends made for thin people, which most of them are, or bags or that are really expensive. Like I had this huge rebel phase around the Louis Vuitton bags, you know, because like everyone has a Louis Vuitton, like, and it became such this thing of like, oh, apparently you're supposed to carry those around as a status symbol no matter what. And I was like, I refuse. Like I won't, you know. If you handed me one for free, I wouldn't carry it around because there's something in me that's kind of like, I don't want to do this just because I'm supposed to. And so I think that I pendulum swung the other way to dressing like this in my sweatshirt. And because I was like, no, I'm not participating in that kind of pressure. You know, like I don't want to have to do that. That stuff still shows up for me. But when I name that, when I can say, I validate the part of me that feels a lot of pressure from this expectation of fashion in the world that I live in, suddenly I feel like, okay, I'm not going to go carry a Louis Vuitton bag. I still maintain my position on that. But like, I might think, well, maybe I don't have to wear a sweatshirt. Like I might, because I feel like I've at least seen. It's like, thank you for naming it. Thank you for seeing me. Now we can move on from here.
It's interesting you mentioned the fashion thing. I had this kind of flashback when certain things would come in fashion. This is more like my teen 20s where I might have been a bit more aware or gave more thought, I guess, to what I was wearing. Things would come out and I would be like, I don't like that. I don't like it. And so I wouldn't until I kind of got used to it, and then I would. So pedal pushers comes up as mine. Do you call them that?
Yes, I know.
So pedal pushers. I remember them coming out when I was about 18. They were all the rage. I was like, it looks like half your trousers are missing. It looks ridiculous. Why are people wearing these things? And then I kind of got used to seeing them, and then I was like, okay, now I'm ready to go and buy some pedal pushers. I couldn't have done it straight away. And there is an element, I guess, of social exposure.
Yes.
And then when you see them around, it's like, oh, actually. And that's happened a few times. I can't think of other examples now. When something first comes into fashion, I'm like, what are you talking about? And then
like
I see
skinny
it for a
jeans,
bit,
I was like,
and then I feel like then I'm making the choice to step forward and do it. But if I think about how my rebel developed, or how I imagine my rebel developed, for me, my rebel very much feels like a rebellious teen. Some people's might feel more like younger than that. I think sometimes, and this might not resonate with everyone, but sometimes trying to find an aged sense of your rebel. And I think mine has developed in the way it has, not saying I wouldn't have had a different kind of one, because I grew up with a lot of rules. I would say my parents are fairly strict comparative to my peers. And I wanted to figure things out for myself, and I wanted to explore and find things out. So I through my teenage years, I lied a lot. I lied a lot about what I was doing and where I was going, because I wanted to do these things that I wasn't allowed. And so there was something about learning that you can't really be explicit about the things that you want to do. There was always this kind of like backdoor way of doing something. So it needed to then feel like a choice. And actually the kinds of things I was doing were not crazy. I wasn't doing drugs. I wasn't promiscuous at that time, and none of that.
Not at that time.
Not at that time. That came later. No. But I guess I was finding these things out for myself, and probably coming to the same moral stance as my parents, if you like, but almost having to, first of all,
Yeah.
break the rules in order to find that out for myself, so that I could integrate what I thought, because I think I grew up being told what to believe, what was true, growing up in a Christian household as well, that we went to church every Sunday. And so there was a lot of, this is the truth, and you need to accept that this is the truth.
Yeah.
And that, so the part of me was, I haven't got to find this out myself.
Yeah.
You know?
So essentially we just, simplistically, we just need to, it needs to come back to us. We need to have a sense of our own autonomy, which is something I think, when you're talking about looking to adolescence and also I think to your childhood, I would expect that that's where that begins, that what was the relationship we had at that time with our own sense of autonomy, and how does that still show up for us now? Where's our sense of boundary? Where's our sense of safety? Where's our sense of freedom and safety within that freedom? All of these questions. And what has been the pattern? Because as you were talking, I was thinking about my own upbringing and the very, very back and forth sense of autonomy I had. My parents were very, at times would be like controlling, and it wasn't my parents. It was more like my dad versus my mom. My dad would be very controlling. My mom was more lenient. I knew I could push those boundaries, and I really did not have a sense of either one. For a long time, I remember thinking about that in terms of my own binge eating and how I would oscillate between these two extremes, and really how that mimicked my own parents, like the parenting style. Me trying to find safety in both, me trying to rebel against both, and that really effed me up.
Yeah, did that work out for you?
Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad.
Love you, really.
Love you, really. It all worked out. Thank you.
You did your best according to what you knew at the time.
They did. Oh gosh. I'm not blaming. I think it's all cultural and social and blah, blah.
I think the biggest mistake that we make, I made, people make, I still make sometimes, is it's like you said with the rebel being quieter now, that we feel like the job is to shut the rebel down, to make them quiet. Like if that is the goal, the rebel feels like that because it's an entity. It's a part of us with it almost. I don't want to kind of like create this sort of splitting, but it has its own boundaries around like what the rebel is. And for me, this is all about, and I see it with binge eating as well, I want to get rid of this part. I don't like this part, so I feel like the work is to get rid of the part I don't like, to get rid of the part that's causing the problems. And I actually think the reframe of turning it the other way and bringing that part in. Because what do rebels need? You think about rebellious teenagers, they really need to be heard. Yeah. They really need validation. They need gentle guidance. They need the opportunity to figure stuff out for themselves as well. And so this all comes from how we're talking to ourselves, these complex inner worlds that we have. And it feels like there's a lot of people in there sometimes. It's like, which one am I? Yeah. And depending on which part's active, if that takes you over, there's always going to be that fragmented sense of self. So I guess my encouragement to people listening is to, can you approach, this is all the stuff, I even wince when I say it. Can you approach the rebel with curiosity and kindness and compassion?
And if you can't, you can get matter of fact about it like I like to do. It's just like, kind of like the rebel's got some points. The rebel is like legit and healthy, quite a healthy part of us. I feel like we'd be remiss to also have an episode without talking about what seems to be so clear to me at this point, but wasn't always, right? This sense of diet culture and the way we're supposed to look. As, there is this rebellion against the inner rebel, I think, speaks up for our own authenticity many times. The things that we believe most of the things that we believe that we should do come from quite a controlling sense of what we're supposed to be in a society that has way too many rules and expectations of us, especially now. I know this as a mother, as well as just generally, I feel like as I someone who's been socialized as female and just a person in the world, like hustle culture and the expectations of productivity and the expectations of how many weeks in the year that I have to dress my kids in certain clothes on certain days for certain weeks to celebrate certain things. And keeping up with all of this, including a body size, fashion trends, eating clean, eating low carb, like the rules that are around we don't even recognize. I don't think sometimes we think that that's normal. We think that that's how we're supposed to be, and don't stop to really think about how oppressive that all is, and that the inner rebel may be speaking up on behalf of the part of us that's like, leave me alone. Like, I'm so tired of this expectation. No, I have found that version, to have some compassion for the version of the rebel who is just like, this is too much. I want to take a nap sometimes and not feel bad about it. Like, think about that angle of things and how really, really like get perspective on how much shoulding exists in your world outside of your conscious awareness. Even every time you open up social media and scroll, there are so many shoulds that are probably going on in your mind that you're not even consciously aware of. They go on in mine, and I'm consciously aware of a lot of them. And yet they're still presenting. And so there's a need for a rebel, I think, to balance the equation and kind of say like, hey, like, cut us some slack. This is a lot for me to keep up with. I don't have the capacity for all of this, much less the energy or the time or the money or the, this and that. So there's quite a lot of value, I think, and authentic perspective in a rebel to give it some credit for.
And off the back of that, I want to speak to people who they say, like, the rest of my life is fine. Like, I've got it together at work. I've got it together here. Like, I'm doing okay in other areas of my life. And this is the one area of my life where I don't got it together. This is the area where, food, body image, whatever that might be. And sometimes, I think of that as like, this is the only place that it's allowed to exist.
Yeah.
So all those rebellious feelings, all that sense of autonomy that's been smushed down, or feeling like you have to comply with all the other expectations, the only place it can play out with is food. So sometimes I've noticed this with some people when they start saying no and allowing the rebel to come out in places where it wants to protect and wants to feel more free, that actually the intensity of the way it's coming out around food can reduce sort of as this byproduct. And I think I always find them the most interesting
cases.
Really interesting.
Those are the ones that wrap up really nicely in a bow.
Oh, they do.
And you're like, see how that works, everybody.
You just were in the wrong
That's
job.
That's the example I'm going to write
relationship or something. And you finally started being true to yourself.
That's all it is.
So well, stay true, folks.
Stay true.
Stay true. And curious and compassionate.
Well, this concludes our Gotham Studios tour. Does it? What time did we begin? Yeah, we're good. We're good. Okay. Well, this was so much fun. I would love to do this again. Real soon.
Real soon.
Real soon.
Let's do it again real soon.
Oh my gosh, I have a whole thing of water here.